Hilchos Brachos Perek Shmini, Laws of Blessings, Chapter 8. We've completed the discussion on the biblical blessing. There's only one biblical blessing, Birkat HaMazon, blessing that you make after eating a meal which contained bread. Related to Birkat HaMazon, we also discussed the blessing which is rabbinic that you make before eating bread, which is Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz, which bread are considered bread to have this blessing, which ones are not, and make the blessing of Mizonot. We also discussed the laws of Al Netilat Yadayim, washing hands, even before we make the blessing of Hamotzi, before the meal begins. In today's chapter, the Rambam spends his time dealing with the other blessings before and after all other foods that are not bread. And as we learned in chapter 1, all of these blessings are rabbinic. Both the blessings before and after other foods are all midrabanan. They were all enacted by the rabbis. So here we have on the slide what's called Maga Esh. Maga Esh means touching fire, but it's a mnemonic, it's a siman, Rashi Tevot, to remember the order of the other blessings. Besides for Hamotzi of course is the most important blessing, the blessing on bread. But outside of that, we have Mem, Gimel, Ayin, Aleph, Shin. Mem stands for Mizonot. See the letters highlighted in red. Gimel is Hagafen, the blessing on wine. Ayin is Ha'etz, the blessing on fruit grown from a tree. Aleph is Ha'adama, blessings on fruit, vegetables that grow from the ground. And Shin, of course, is Shehakol, the all-encompassing blessing that belongs to everything else. The Rambam will discuss a number of different fruits, vegetables, and products and their exact blessing in today's chapter. Then we have the after blessing. So the rabbinic after blessing is Borei Nefashot Rabot. I just put the text here. The Rambam doesn't detail the text in this chapter, just so we know what it means, what we're actually saying when we make the after blessing. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. We thank Hashem, Borei Nefashot Rabot v'chesronan, for creating many souls and their needs. Hashem made us people and we have needs. And then we thank Him, Al Kol Ma Shebarata Lahachayot Bahem Nefesh Kol Chai, for everything you created to enliven the souls of all those living. So we are souls, we're created, we have needs, and then Hashem also gives us food which fills our needs. Baruch HaOlamim, blessed is the one who lives forever. And so it's a simple, short blessing that we make to Hashem in thanks for pretty much every other food, besides for, of course, bread, which has Birkat HaMazon, as well as 3 other categories of food that have the blessing afterwards, which is called Bracha Achat Me'en Shalosh. One blessing which summarizes 3. These are foods that in a way should have required Birkat HaMazon, the full 3 blessing of the grace after meals. Yet the sages said, we're not going to make a full Birkat HaMazon, we're only going to make a partial one, a summarized version. We learned one of the categories already, that is the Al HaMichya. When you eat baked goods that are not Hamotzi, rather Mizonot, after them you make the Al HaMichya V'Al HaKalkala. Today we're going to learn that in addition to that, whenever you drink wine, there's a special after blessing, and whenever you eat one of the Shivat HaMinim, one of the 7 species for which Israel is praised, those fruits, you also make a special blessing afterwards. Same text as the Al HaMichya, but it begins and ends in a different way, as we will see in today's chapters. That's what we have ahead of us. Let's go without further ado. Halacha Aleph. Says the Rambam, Kol Perot Ha'ilan, all fruits that grow on the tree. Mivarchin Alehen Batchila, Borei Peri Ha'etz. Before we eat them, we make the blessing. Thank you, Hashem, for creating the fruit of the tree. Ulebasof, and after we eat them, we say Borei Nefashot Rabot, as we had over here. Chutz Mechameshet Haminin Haktuvin BaTorah, with the exception of the 5 special types that are mentioned in the Torah. The Rambam calls them 5, even though we know Shivat HaMinim, because 2 of them are wheat and barley, which go into the category of grain, which are in a whole different realm. They have the blessings of Mizonot, Hamotzi, we already discussed them. The other 5 are fruits. Vehem, and they are anavim, verimonim, grapes and pomegranates, uteinim v'zeitim, utmarim, figs, olives, and dates. Shehu, which a person in those cases, even though in the beginning you make the same blessing, borei peri ha'etz, but at the end, mevarech alehen basof, bracha achat me'en shalosh. As I mentioned before, at the end of the eating of these fruits, we make the one blessing which summarizes the 3 of Birkat HaMazon. That's for fruits that grow on trees. On fruit of the ground and vegetables, the blessing before eating them is, thank you Hashem, the creator of the fruit of the ground. And afterwards, like on fruit, you make Borei Nefashot Rabot, the blessing of Borei Nefashot, which we have here on the screen. Dvarim, all other things, she'en gidulan min haaretz, which do not grow on the ground. Kigon, for example, basar ugvina, meat and cheese, v'dagim uveitzim, fish and eggs, umayim v'chalav udvash, water, milk and honey, v'chayotze bahen, and anything like that. You can't put them into a category of fruit, they don't grow from a tree. You can't put them in the category of vegetables, they don't grow from the ground. They're just the everything. So the everything stuff gets encompassed in the everything blessing. But chila, before eating them, mevarech, you make the blessing of shehakol. Say, thank you Hashem, shehakol niya bidvaro, that everything came into being by His word. Everything being all those things that don't have a specific category. And after them, like fruit and vegetables, the after blessing is borei nefashot rabot. Now the Rambam says quite a novelty. V'hashotem mayim, one who drinks water, shelo leravot tzma'o, when it's not with the purpose of quenching his thirst. For example, you want to just wash down some food that got stuck in your throat. Eino ta'un bracha, lo lefanav velo la'acharav. It does not require a blessing both before or after. And this is mentioned already in the Talmud, this concept that we only make a blessing of shehakol niya bidvaro and borei nefashot rabot on water when it's being drank out of thirst. When it's not being drank out of thirst, we don't make any blessing at all. Although technically this is the dry halacha, nevertheless today the custom is to always make a blessing on water. Halacha bet, hasochet peirot v'hotzi mehen mashkin. One who squeezes fruit and gets liquid out of them. Apple juice, orange juice. Mevarech alehen batchila shehakol. On this juice, we don't consider it to be the essence of the fruit. And therefore, as the Talmud says, it's just fluid. It's just liquid. And so it's like water, and you make a blessing on them in the beginning, shehakol ulubasov borei nefashot, and at the end, borei nefashot rabot. Chutz, there are only two fruits whose juice gets a special blessing. Min ha'anavim v'hazeitim. Grapes and olives. Sha'al hayayin, on the liquid produced from grapes, which is wine, mevarech, you make a special blessing, hu mevarech, borei peri hagafen. Blessed is Hashem, the creator of the fruit of the vine. Ulubasov, and after the drinking wine, bracha achat me'en shalosh. You don't make the regular blessing of borei nefashot, you make a special blessing, the one blessing which summarizes three, the summary of Birkat HaMazon. Ta'al Hashemen, and on oil says the Rambam, batchilahu mevarech borei pri ha'etz. According to the Rambam, the blessing on oil does get the essence of the olive, and therefore it stays in the status of the olive, and the blessing before it is borei pri ha'etz. When do we make this blessing? Shehaya choshesh bigrono, when you had a throat ache, a sore throat, and therefore you drank oil together with some vegetable, some liquid in which vegetables were stewed, or something like that, in which case your drink of this olive oil gave you pleasure. It tasted good, so you make the blessing of ha'etz. But if you simply drank oil, for no reason, or you drink oil by itself even if you had a sore throat, or you didn't have a sore throat and you just drink oil for no reason, in this case we cannot say that you're literally eating the olive. You're not really having so much benefit. So the blessing before is shehakol, you did not have a specific pleasure in the taste of the oil. I should note that l'maaseh, Shulchan Aruch, it's brought down that oil, if you just consume oil on its own, you don't make any bracha at all. Halacha gimul pirot o yirakot, fruit and vegetables, shadarkan lehe'achel chayim, whose norm is to be eaten raw. And the Rambam doesn't give any examples because the norms are dictated by the times. So in today's day and age, we have to look at certain vegetables and fruits and see if they're normally eaten raw. For example, classic example is tomatoes, cucumbers. They're always eaten raw. Im bishlan oshlakan. If you then cook them or stewed them, mevarech alehen, you've converted them out of their normal state. And therefore now when you eat this stew or cooked vegetable, you make before it not a ha'adama or not ha'etz, rather shehakol. You make a shehakol that goes into the category of regular other foods. Ulubasov borei nefashot. At the end you still make the regular borei nefashot. The yirakot, on the other hand, if you add vegetables, shadarkan lehe'achel shlukin, their normal way is to only be eaten when they're cooked. For example, potatoes. Nobody eats raw potatoes. Kigon keruv balefet, and the Rambam here gives some examples, which apparently were never eaten raw in his time. For example, cabbage and turnips. Im achalan chayim, if you then went ahead against the norm and you ate them raw, also mevarech alehen batchila shehakol ulevasov borei nefashot rabot. We can no longer give them the regular blessing because that's not the way they're regularly eaten. You went out of the norm. So you make the blessing of shehakol, and at the end you still keep the blessing of borei nefashot rabot. V'im bishlan oshlakan. But if you cook them or stewed them as the normal custom is, mevarech alehen borei pri ha'adama ulevasov borei nefashot rabot. Even though you would think you made them into a mush, whatever it is, that you transformed its original condition, nevertheless, since that's the way it's regularly eaten, that's when you make its proper blessing of ha'adama and the after blessing of borei nefashot rabot. Dvarim shadarkan lehe'achel chayin u'mevushalin. What about things which you can eat both raw and cooked? Achalan, ben chayin, ben muvashalin. Well, whatever state you eat them, whether they're raw or they're cooked, You make the proper blessing before you eat them. Whatever belongs to them, whatever blessing belongs to them. If they were fruit of a tree, you make borei pri ha'etz. If they were fruits of the ground or vegetables, you make the blessing of vegetables, which is borei pri ha'adama. Thank you, Hashem, the creator of the fruit of the ground. If you have vegetables, which is normal to stew, shlakan, and you stewed them, mevarech al meshelek shalahen, borei pri ha'adama. Not only on the stewed vegetables themselves will you make the proper vegetable blessing, but even on the liquid, the soup in which the vegetables were stewed, you will make also borei pri ha'adama. Now how come? When it came to fruits, squeezing juice out of the fruits, we said it's a regular shehakol. Here, so to speak, squeezing juice out of the vegetables when you make a soup out of it, and you make ha'adama. So the Rambam therefore says, that's what the Rambam adds in the beginning, shedarkan, it's the normal way. Because that's the way these vegetables are made with the intention of making such soups, so it's like an extension of the vegetable. Other opinions say because you're actually drawing out more of the essence of the vegetable when you stew them versus fruits that you simply squeeze, you don't get the essence of the fruit. Okay. For who, says the Rambam, that's only provided shashlakan lishtot memeyen, if you made the stew having in mind to drink the liquid. Because the water, the liquid of a stew, becomes like the vegetable stew in a place where that's normal to consume this liquid. Dvash tmarim, honey of dates. It's a picture of dates honey. I think today it's called date syrup or silan. The point is, it's the stuff that you get out of the honey. This is not considered to be an extension of the dates. It's a new entity, and the blessing before it is shehakol. But let's say you would have quashed dates by hand, and you took out the seeds and you made them into like a doughy paste. In this case, they are considered to still be in the status of dates, and the blessing you make upon them is borei pri ha'etz, like on proper fruit. And afterwards, since it's a date, one of the Shivat Haminim, the blessing to be recited afterwards would be the one blessing which summarizes 3. By the way, the commentaries have noted that this brings up an issue regarding applesauce. Applesauce is the same thing. You've taken an apple and you've crushed it by hand or by machine, and now you made it into a doughy paste. Nevertheless, the common practice is to make on applesauce shehakol, because the applesauce has no recognition of the prior state of the apples. It can look like anything. You show somebody applesauce, there's no zecher, no semblance of apples. But when it comes to dates, somehow when you make a doughy paste out of dates, you can always tell that it's still dates. Halacha he, hakanim hametukim, the sweet cane. We know this today as sugar cane. Shesochatin ota, that the typical way of eating or consuming these things is that you squeeze them, and you cook the squeezed residue ad sheyikpa, until it crystallizes, and it looks like salt, sugar, as we know it. Kol hageonim omrim, says the Rambam, a very interesting halacha. All the geonim typically say, shemavarchin alav borei pri ha'adama. Since it grows out of the ground, they say the blessing is borei pri ha'adama, like a vegetable. Umiktatam amru, some very few of the geonim say borei pri ha'etz, that actually sugar cane should be considered in the status of a fruit. And on the sugar as well, you make borei pri ha'etz. V'chein amru, they also said, shamotzetzotam kanim, that if you suck on this cane as it is raw, mevarech borei pri ha'adama, the blessing should be made like on fruits of the ground, borei pri ha'adama. Says the Rambam, rarely does he quote himself, v'ani omer, I say, in contrast to all of the opinions mentioned above, she'ein ze pri, sugar cane is not a fruit at all. Ve'ein mevarchin alav ela shehakol, the only blessing to be made on sugar and sugar cane is shehakol niyah bidvaro, shelo yiyeh dvash elu hakanim, because the honey, the residue of these canes, which has gone through a change, a metamorphosis through being cooked over the fire, should not be any different, gadol mitvash tmarim. It shouldn't be any greater than the honey of dates, the date syrup, or where that didn't even go through a metamorphosis, a change, a transformation through fire. As we said before, that the bracha on date syrup is shehakol. So therefore, sugar cane and sugar should be no different, and the blessing is shehakol. As a matter of fact, that is the accepted halacha today. We make a shehakol on sugar and sugar cane. Halacha vav, hakor. We know this today as hearts of palm. It's this stuff that can be found at the top stalk of a palm tree. Looks like white wood. Here you see on the right some hearts of palm in the middle of being processed. These are actually special hearts of coconut palm trees on the top left, but that's the hearts of palm on the bottom, as it's more familiar to you in your salad plate, typically. So the blessing on hearts of palm, says the Rambam, it cannot be considered a fruit. You simply make on it a shehakol, like a regular general category of food. Now we go on to the halacha of caper berries. On the left top, you see a caper bush, can get pretty high, about 3 feet tall. On the bottom left, you see flowering buds of the caper berry, and right next to it, you see the processed final caper berries. And on the right side, we have an artist's version. It's not an actual real version, but it's an artist's version of all the various parts of the caper bush. First, you have the leaves growing, then you have those little dots over here. Those are flowering buds. Then it turns into an actual flower. A whole flower kind of grows. And then also you have the actual berries, the caper berries, which are also edible as well. So the Rambam gives us the halacha of the different edible parts of the caper berry. Kafras shel tzlaf, the petals, the flower petals of the caper berry. Mevarech alav borei peri ha'adama. The blessing is borei peri ha'adama. Those are considered to be vegetables. They're not considered to be fruits. Mipnei she'eino peri, it's not a fruit. V'ha'avionot shel tzlaf, but the berries, the actual caper berries of the caper bush, hein ha'pri, they are the fruit. Shehen kitzurot tmarim dakim ktanim, which are like thin, small dates. That's their shape. Nevarech alein borei peri ha'etz, and on them we do make borei peri ha'etz. On a caper berry, we would make a borei peri ha'etz. Halacha zayin ha'pilpilin v'hanzangvil, pepper and ginger. When they are moist, the blessing upon them should be like a vegetable. But when they're dry, they have been converted into a spice. They don't require any blessing before or after. They are a spice and no longer a food. Similarly, if you have foods that are not fit for consumption, or drinks that are not fit for consumption, you had to eat them, let's say, for medicinal purposes, or whatever reason it is, doesn't require a blessing, not before and not after. Says the Rambam, hapat she'ipsa, moldy bread, v'hayayin shehikrim, and wine that's spoiled. The word shehikrim literally means developed a film. So just 2 pictures, I'm not sure how clear you can see it. But on top of the wine, you can see a little film. It's developing on the wine. That's a sign that it's beginning to spoil. V'tavshil she'avrat tzurato, and a dish that has become spoiled. Avrat tzurato means its form has gone away. So you can't really tell it's a dish anymore because it's gotten rotten. V'hanovlot, and fallen fruit. Shehen pagin, which are unripe fruit that have fallen off by the wind from a tree. V'hashechar, and beer, v'hachometz, and vinegar, v'hagovai, and locusts. According to the Sfaradim, some locusts with proper signs are kosher to be eaten. V'hamelach, and salt, v'hakmein, v'hapitriot, mushrooms and truffles. Al kulan mivarech tchila shehakol, and all of these things, the blessing is shehakol. Even though they've been processed from things that grow from the ground, or mushrooms, they seem to grow from the ground. Nevertheless, according to the Talmud, mushrooms nurture from the air, not from the ground. They don't make shehakol. And same thing with beer and vinegar and all those stuff, the blessing is shehakol. A general rule is if the before blessing on the food is shehakol, you can be sure that afterwards you're going to be making the blessing of borei nefashot. Anything which requires a blessing to be made after it, ta'un bracha lefanav, requires a blessing to be made before it. The rule doesn't go the opposite way necessarily. You could have some things which you have to make a blessing before, but not a blessing after. You made a blessing on bread, but you didn't eat enough. You don't have to make a blessing after, for example. Halachat tet, shmarim, sediment, dregs of wine. You don't see this typically in your wine today, but if you processed wine from actual grapes, you will notice that after the process is over, the wine has fermented at the bottom of the barrel, or sometimes located within the barrel of wine, you will see these dregs, these sedimentary pieces of the grapes that haven't turned into wine. And in some areas of halacha, though, they are considered to be somewhat wine. So the Rambam says, if you take a whole bunch of wine dregs, shanatan alehem shlosha, v'hotzi mehen arba'a, you poured onto them 3 measures of water, and the resulting liquid increased by 1/4. And now you have 4 measures of liquid. So let's say you put in 3 ounces of water, and after going through the dregs, now there's 4 ounces of this water dregs mixture. Says the Rambam, that's enough to classify it as wine. Mevarech alehen borei peri hagafen. The pre-blessing should be the blessing on wine. Shezeh yayin mazugu. Because you can consider it to be that diluted wine. In those days, the wine was very strong. They would dilute it very heavily, about 3/4 to 1/4 ratio water to wine. Or I should say 3 to 1 ratio water to wine. So therefore, so long as 1/4 was actual wine, that was enough to classify it as wine. Here too, you put in 3 ounces of water, it came out with 4 ounces. Obviously, one of the ounces is made up of the wine sediment. So it still qualifies for the hagafen blessing. But if you put in 3 ounces of water and you only got less than 4 ounces of wine or of this wine water dreg mixture, even if it tastes like wine, the blessing before it is still shehakol. It's literally considered water, not wine. Halacha Yud says the Rambam, what if you made a mistake in blessings? If you made a blessing on a fruit, thank you Hashem for bringing the fruit of the ground, not fruit of the tree. Yatsa, you fulfilled your obligation. Why? Because even trees nurture themselves from the ground. So in the end, the apple growing on the tree ultimately came from the ground. But on fruits of the ground, if you made a blessing, if you made the blessing that belongs to the fruit on a vegetable, lo yatsa, you have not fulfilled your obligation, because you cannot trace the ha'etz to the hadama. A carrot doesn't grow on a tree. But on any fruit or vegetable, if you made a mistake according to the Rambam, im berach shehakol yatsa. If you made a blessing of shehakol, you have fulfilled your obligation. Ba'afilu ala pat v'alayayin, a novelty of the Rambam. Even if you made a blessing of shehakol on bread or on wine, by mistake, it fulfills your obligation, and you can go on and keep on eating. Today we don't really rule like that in halacha, and shehakol cannot usually be used as an excuse for any other fruit that you don't know the blessing, or that you made a mistake about it. You should correct it and make the proper blessing. Halacha Yud Aleph, lakach kos shel shechar biyado. Let's say you took a cup of beer in your hand. The proper blessing on beer is shehakol. V'yitchila bracha al manat lomar shehakol. You began to say the blessing on your beer, having in mind the proper blessing of shehakol. But then, as you're uttering the blessing, v'ta'ah ve'amar borei pri hagafen, you made a mistake and you say the wrong blessing, as though it's wine. Borei pri hagafen. Ein machzirin oto. Fascinatingly, we do not make you go back, because while saying the main part of the blessing, you had in mind to say the right one. Let's say you had also in front of you fruits of the ground, some vegetables, and you began to say the blessing thinking that you're going to say the right one, the blessing of Borei Pri Ha'adama. And then while you're uttering it, you made a mistake and said the improper blessing on fruit. We do not return you, we don't make you go back and say the proper blessing, because in your mind you had the proper intent when making the main body of the blessing. Similarly, if you had a cooked dish of grain, on which the proper blessing should be mizonot. And indeed you began the blessing having in mind to finish off mizonot. Then you made a mistake, and instead you said the blessing of hamotzi, which belongs to bread. Yatsa, again you have fulfilled your obligation. And the Rambam gives the underlying reason for all of the last few halachot. Because in the moment that you mention Hashem's name and His kingship, every blessing begins, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Talk about Hashem's kingship. Shehein ikara bracha, which are the mainstay of the blessing. Lo nitkaven elo la bracha haruya leoto hamin. In your intent, you had in mind to say the proper blessing which befits this type of food. V'ho'il v'lo haya bi'ikara bracha ta'ut. Since in the main part of the blessing there was no mistake, afal pisha ta'a b'sofa, even if you made a mistake in the end when you actually uttered the blessing which should belong to this specific food, yatsa ve'en machzirin oto, you have fulfilled your obligation and we do not make you go back. Halacha Bet says the Rambam a couple of major rules that pertain to all blessings. Kol habrachot ha'elu. All of these blessings blessings before food, all the blessings after food that we're talking about in this chapter. Im nistapek lo bahem, im berach o lo berach. If you ever enter into a state of doubt whether or not you made these blessings, eino chozer mevarech, you do not return and make the blessing again. Lo batchila v'lo basof, not the first blessing, not the after blessing, because they are rabbinical. And we have a rule that whenever you're in doubt about something rabbinic, you go towards the lenient side. And you assume that you made the blessing and you don't go and make the blessing again. Perhaps it will be a blessing in vain. Shachach, another general rule. Let's say you forgot, and you just popped some food into your mouth, you didn't make a blessing. Says the Rambam, hayu mashkin. If it was liquid which you put into your mouth, there's no way you can recite a blessing while liquid is in your mouth. So therefore, bol'an, you must first swallow the liquid, and you make a blessing afterward. Commentaries argue, what does it mean you make a blessing afterward? Does it mean you lost the chance to make the bracha rishonah, the first blessing, you can only make the after blessing? Or does it mean that you should make the pre-blessing afterwards? Even though you've already swallowed the water, you should now make a blessing of shehakol. Halacha l'maaseh, that is the halacha. If you put water into your mouth, you should swallow it, then make a shehakol, and then borei nefashot rabot. But if it was fruit that's sitting in your mouth, that were you to throw them out of your mouth, they'd become disgusting, like berries and grapes. And this is one of the only cases where you can have something in your mouth while making a bracha. You move it over to one side of your mouth, you make the proper blessing of ha'etz or ha'adama, whatever it is, and then you swallow them. But if it were to be something that would not become disgusting, if you were to spit it out, like beans and peas, poltan mipiv, you expel them from your mouth, put them back into your hand or into your plate, ad sheyivarechu piv panui, till you make a blessing while your mouth is empty, which is the ideal way to make a blessing, with an empty mouth. Then you go back and eat it again. But only because it won't become disgusting. If it's a food that will become disgusting, you move it to one side and you make the blessing. Halacha Yud Gimel, let's talk a little bit about Kedima, the laws of precedence when it comes to blessings. And I should note that La Halacha, it's much more complex than the Rambam is going to make it. The Rambam has a very simple order of precedence. Today, La Halacha, we take many other things into account. But let's see what the Rambam says. Hayu lefanav minin harbe. Many foods are in front of you. Imayu birchotehan shavot. First of all, if they all had the same blessings, you have apples, oranges, plums in front of you, mivarech alachat me'en upoteret hashar. All you have to do is make the proper blessing on one of them, and the rest are exempt. But if their blessings aren't the same, you have some meat, and you have an apple, and you have a carrot, so all three different blessings. You must make on each one the blessing which belongs to it. But how do you decide the order? Says the Rambam, it's all about your desire. Whatever one you want first, you make a blessing on first. The commentaries say it doesn't even go by what you want generally. What you want in this moment, whatever you want today, whatever you're interested today first, that's what you make a blessing on first. If you don't have any specific desire, then you follow this code. If among this pile of food, there's one of the 7 types upon which Israel was blessed, you make the blessing on that Shivat HaMinim first. And the Rambam gives us a fascinating rule. Whichever one comes first in the verse, comes first for blessing. So this is the verse actually from next week's Parsha, which describes the 7 types of fruit, produce with which Israel was blessed. It says, Eretz chita u'se'ora. It's a land of wheat and barley, v'gefen u'te'ina v'rimon, and grapes and figs and pomegranates. Eretz zet shemen u'dvash. It's a land of olive oil and honey, which refers to dates. So, if you read the Rambam simply, whichever one comes first in the verse comes first for blessing. So the numbering you would think should be first chita, then se'ora, then gefen, then teina, then rimon, then zayit, and then dvash. But now the Rambam clarifies what he meant. The hashiva, the 7 types that we're referring to, hin ha'amurim b'pasuk zeh, are the ones that are stated in this verse. Eretz chita u'se'ora, gefen u'teina v'rimon, eretz zet shemen u'dvash, which we just saw on the screen. Dvash zeh hu dvash tmarim. When the Torah says honey, it means honey of dates. However, even though it's written in this list, which you would think to follow, says the Rambam, b'hatmarim kodmin la'anavim. The blessing on dates actually comes before a blessing on grapes. Shahatmarim sheni le'eretz, v'ha'anavim shlishi le'eretz. Because the word date appears second next to the word eretz, land in the verse. Whereas grapes are third next to the word eretz. If you see in the verse, the word eretz appears there twice. Eretz chita u'se'ora, eretz zeit shemen u'dvash. Since the zayit is closer to eretz, and dvash is closer to eretz than grapes are, so these two actually come before the gefen. So the way it goes is chita se'ora, because those are first and second after the first eretz. Then you skip to olives and dates, because those are first and second to the second eretz. And then, and only then, do you go gefen, teina, v'rimon, grapes, figs, and pomegranates. So if you have a pile of foods with a bunch of these foods in the middle, you choose these ones first, and you go in this order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Says the Rambam Halacha Yud Dalet. We've been talking about bracha achat shemein shalosh, the one blessing which is a summary of 3. We've already learned the text for the blessing that you make after eating baked goods of mizonot. Ala michya v'ala kalkala. We saw it in an earlier chapter. Today the Rambam wants to talk about the other times that we make the blessing of bracha achat mein shalosh. Shel chameshet haminin shel perot v'shel yayin. The one that you make on the 5 types of fruit, and the one you make after drinking wine. Says the Rambam, that blessing, he shel minei hadagan. It's literally the same text as the one you make on grain. Elash ala perotu omer, but then on the fruits, you have a different beginning. Instead of saying, thank you Hashem al hamichya v'ala kalkala, for the sustaining and filling foods, you say, ala etz v'al priya etz. Thank you Hashem for creating trees and the fruit of the trees. V'al tenuvat hasadeh, v'al eretz chemda, and then you continue for the produce of the field and for the wonderful land. For wine, the beginning is ala gefen val priya gefen. Thank you Hashem for creating the vine and the fruit of the vine. V'chotem bishtehen, and the ending is also different. Unlike when it comes to grains, we end off ala aretz v'ala michya. Thank you Hashem for the land and for the filling foods. In this case, on wine and on fruits, the ending is ala aretz v'ala perot. Thank you Hashem for the land and for the fruit. The Rambam says that this ending applies also to wine. Today's halacha, we rule like the other poskim who say that on wine we also have a different ending. Ala aretz val priya gafen, for the land and for the fruit of the vine. But the Rambam puts the ending of wine and fruit identically. If you were in Israel, you're eating Israeli fruit, chotem, the ending should be ala aretz val peroteha. I'm thanking Hashem for the land and for its fruits, because you're literally eating the fruit of Israel in Israel. Commentaries say even if you're eating fruits of Israel outside of Israel, since they came from Israel, you say ala aretz val peroteha. Even though we had the text given by the Rambam in an earlier chapter, and over there he just gave us a summary of the 3 blessings of Birkat HaMazon, the Rambam over here adds that there are those who add in the blessing of summarizing 3, Kodem Chatima, before we end the blessing, they add the following line, Kikel Tova Metivata, God, you are a good God and a God that does good. Shu Me'in Bracha Revi'it, which corresponds to the 4th blessing added by the sages of the Mishnah to Birkat HaMazon. As a matter of fact, that's how it appears in our Sidurim. But there are those that say that the only time the sages enacted the 4th blessing was in the bracha after filling food after bread. But we should not mention it in Birkat HaMazon. The Rambam doesn't rule either way, but like I said, in our Sidurim we do add the words Kikel Tova Metivata. Says the Rambam halachat tedvav. What if you ate foods that go into a number of these categories? Shata yayin, ve'achal tmarim, ve'achal tavshil shel chameshet b'nei dagan. You drank wine, you ate dates, and you also ate some crackers that have a mizonot blessing. So now you have to say bracha achat me'en shalosh for each of them, but you don't say a separate one. Says the Rambam mevarech ba'acharona, at the end of the after blessing, you include them all. You say Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, God, Lord, King of the universe. Ala michya v'ala kalkala, v'ala gefen v'al priya gefen, v'ala etz v'al priya etz. You say them all. For the filling foods and the sustaining foods, for the vine and the fruit of the vine, for trees and the fruit of the trees, and then you continue about tunuvat hasadeh, v'al eretz chemda v'chulei, for the produce of the field, for the wonderful land, v'chotem, and you end off, also all-inclusive, Baruch atah Hashem al ha'aretz v'ala michya v'ala perot. For the land, the filling foods, and the fruit, because according to the Rambam, the fruit includes both the fruit and the vine. In today's text, we would actually say al ha'aretz v'ala michya v'al priya gefen v'ala perot, or v'ala perot v'al priya gefen. You mentioned also the fruit of the vine directly. But what if you ate 2 different foods? One that would classify for borei nefashot, and one that would classify for bracha achat me'en shalosh. Let's say you ate meat and you drank wine. You make a blessing on each one individually in the after blessing. For the wine, you make the wine blessings. For the meat, you make borei nefashot. But what if you ate 2 types of fruit? Fruit that are part of the Shivat HaMinim and fruit that are not. So you ate figs or grapes, and then you ate also apples and pears, or the like. It says the Rambam mevarech basof bracha achat me'en shalosh. What you can do here is, you can make the blessing that summarizes 3, which will go on the figs or the grapes, v'hi kolelet hakol, and it will include everything. It will cover the apples and pears as well. Because in the end, they're all fruits of the tree, and it happens to be in the blessing for the Shivat HaMinim, you mention fruits of the tree, so they can cover the apples and pears. And the same would apply to everything like it. However, the commentaries raise one issue where it's in doubt what the Rambam would rule. What happens if you drink wine and you eat regular apples and pears? So the question is, now, do the other fruits go into the category of wine? Wine is also included in fruits, so maybe they can also be covered in it, but maybe not. That's a tzarich iyun. And nevertheless, according to our custom, which I mentioned before, that we always mention wine separately, of course, you have to make a separate blessing on the wine and a separate blessing on the apples and the pears.